Hi friends, my name is Julie and welcome back to my farm. Today's video is not going to be a happy one, but it is a video that I feel like I need to make. It's a story I think should be shared, and my hope is that by getting it out there, I will help some of you avoid some of the hard lessons that I learned this week. Just to give you a little bit of backstory, not long ago we decided to purchase Donna here, a proven and pregnant Hereford sow. And she was really meant to be the start of a whole new pig breeding operation for us. Over the past few years, we have had hundreds of piglets born, mostly American guinea hog, some commercial Yorkshire Durrock crosses mixed in there as well. And they've done amazing, almost entirely on their own in the woods in all kinds of weather. But this time around, we wanted to treat Donna a little special. We set her up with this nice area, all her own barn, her own green space. We bought food especially for her so we wouldn't change her diet. And we really prepared what we felt like was an ideal farrowing pen or birthing stall for her. We ran electricity out here so we could have heat lamps in case the piglets were born during a really cold snap. And we set that up in a sort of getaway corner so they had a safe place to bed down and not risk mom accidentally laying on them. And we put a board in front that was low enough so that mom could get in and out easily, but that the piglets hopefully could not get out and end up stuck in this mud. And Donna was turning out to be a really great pig. She had a lot of personality. She'd get really playful when we were in the pen with her, and she was getting really comfortable with us giving her scratches as we were trying to build that trusting relationship with her leading up to her having her piglets. Now, the breeder we bought her from did not know her exact due date. He assumed somewhere in early January, but it became clear over the last few weeks that it was going to be much sooner. Her milk had really started to come in, her udders were getting really full and swollen. And of course, that's the natural progression of things and a good sign that she's getting ready to farrow. But from the time we saw that milk come in to the time she had her piglets was probably a week and a half, maybe even 2 weeks. And that's a really long time. In my experience, it's usually less than a week and somewhere in the realm of 1 to 3 days before they have their piglets that you really see that kind of engorgement on a mama sow. But not knowing this pig and not knowing if that was normal for her or not, I wasn't really too concerned. Her behavior was completely normal from what we had seen in the short time that we have owned her. Well, after waiting and waiting, the big day finally arrived. I came out of the house and I instantly knew that she had had her piglets. Good morning, friends. It is a chilly Saturday morning. We've been expecting piglets from our Hereford sow, Donna, and she has not come out of her hut yet. And normally she would be out waiting for her breakfast at this point. So pretty sure she had her piglets. We're gonna go take a peek. I think I can hear nursing. Good morning, Mama. Oh yeah, I hear nursing. So as you might imagine, I was elated to see that she had had them on her own and was nursing them, and everything looked to be in good order. Not knowing this pig very well, I very cautiously approached her while she was nursing the piglets, and she gave me some warning grunts, which is totally normal for a sow, but I got in there close enough to see that she had 7 piglets nursing, and I could see that she had at least one, what turned out to be 2 that were already under her and crushed, unfortunately. Right away, a little bit of disappointment. When I was sold this pig, I was told that she had had 12 to 14 piglets per litter. So I was really expecting more than just the 9 that she had. I was also a little heartbroken to see that she had already crushed 2 before I even knew that the piglets had arrived. And there's really nothing I could do about that. Maybe for this larger pig, we could have given her a little more space to maneuver, but piglet death by mother crushing them or smothering them is just about the highest cause of infant mortality. So it's something that we expect to see a certain percentage of. But on the bright side, all the other piglets seemed to be normal and healthy. There were none that seemed immediately weak or runty, and she was acting like I would expect a sow that just gave birth to act. Kind of sleepy, a little protective, and doing what moms do, taking care of her babies. As the morning progressed, she did eventually come out and get a big drink of water and take a pee. And I noticed that she wasn't really interested in eating anything, but again, I didn't think that there was anything abnormal for a sow that had just given birth. She did seem like she was a little bit uncomfortable walking, a little bow-legged and back, but again, she had just given birth to 9 babies and her mammary glands, or her udders, were really, really engorged. So they were kind of swinging and bumping against her legs, and I imagine that that didn't feel very good. But still, really nothing to worry about. While she was out here taking a drink, I was able to go in and handle the piglets and make sure that everybody was normal, no obvious problems with any of them, and I made sure that they could find their heat source and tuck in under that safety board. And I left them all curled up in there, well fed and warm and happy as can be. Now, just a little while later in the day, I noticed that she still had not eaten anything, and so I got some kitchen scraps, some treats from the house, and I tried to hand feed them to her. And on a normal basis, this pig would take my hand off trying to get that treat from me, and she refused to eat any of it. I even put it right under her nose, and no interest whatsoever. So naturally, that got me a little bit concerned. As a little bit more time went on, I noticed that she was spending quite a bit of time in this wallow. And that was actually something that we had seen leading up to her delivery. She seemed really warm, but we were monitoring her temperature. At no time did she ever have a fever. And like I said, she was acting normal in every other way. She just seemed to be using the wallow a lot more frequently. But she was also huge. She was very, very pregnant, full of milk. And I figured that just felt good to lay in the mud and cool off. It wasn't until later in the day that I realized that her behavior, wanting to lay in that wallow, was probably a problem. One of the factors was that it was very cold that day. So I imagine that was icy cold water that she was laying in. And at one point I noticed that she was shivering laying in there. So naturally I went and tried to encourage her to get up and get out of it. And she would not get up. She would sit up like a dog on her front legs, but I could not get her butt to move out of that wallow. When I tried to move her, she was squealing like it was painful. At one point she did even try to lift herself, and it seemed like maybe she was just too weak or it hurt too much to do so. So I got Daryl involved. He tried to get her out with a little more force. Still nothing, couldn't get her to budge. She just flopped right back down in that wallow. And that's when we knew that something was dreadfully wrong with our mama pig. So right away, I took her temperature. It was normal. I actually took it repeatedly throughout that day and the next day, and at no point did she ever have a fever. Her temp was even a little bit below what's normal for pigs, I imagine because she had been laying in icy cold water for most of the day. She had passed a very large amount of placenta. There was every indication that that wasn't a problem. She had zero discharge. So some of the immediate concerns, like maybe a stillborn or a stuck piglet or a retained placenta, things that could cause a uterine infection, weren't really at the top of my list of concerns. What I was concerned about were her udders. And I've had enough animals born on this farm and doctored enough mamas to know that mastitis is no joke. Mastitis is an infection of the mammary gland. It happens when bacteria is introduced through the teat. And normally those teats are sealed tight. But when an udder becomes really, really engorged and full of milk, sometimes just the act of laying on it is enough to sort of squeeze it and have some of that milk drip out, and then that opens that orifice and can potentially allow some bacteria into the gland. So conditions were definitely right for her to maybe have a case of mastitis. It can be a really hard infection to clear up, and it can be very painful for the mother in the meantime. So I knew I really had no time to waste in starting treatment in case this was mastitis. So I immediately started her on injectable antibiotics, which luckily I had on hand. I really would have liked to give her an anti-inflammatory or a pain med, but unfortunately I did not have those available to me. And that is one of the lessons learned here, is that it's something that I'm going to try and stock in the future. And while I did have and know of some topical treatments that I could have used to help her, such as applying hot and then cold compresses and applying things like peppermint oil. I have a cream actually made to help with udder edema. But because she was spending virtually all of her time in that muddy wallow, there was really no way that I could apply any of those treatments effectively. Luckily, she was responding to the sound of her piglets, and she would summon the strength to go in and nurse them every couple hours. And we figured as long as she was taking care of them, that was really the best for everybody. We didn't want to intervene with the piglets at that point. We figured that would just stress her out more. Plus the act of them nursing on her was going to be some of the best medicine if she did have mastitis, because they could help clear those glands out and relieve some of that pressure that was making her so uncomfortable. So once I felt like we had done what we could for her as far as medication and treatment, I took a little time and went in and researched what was going on with her to try and find some answers and maybe some alternative treatments. What I found was that what she probably had was not mastitis, but a condition called eglactia. And it is simply an overproduction of milk causing edema of the udder. And it is very common in high-producing sows. This was the third litter she had delivered. She was sort of coming into the prime of her milk production, and she was used to having far bigger litters than 7, so she had produced way too much for the number of piglets that she actually had nursing on her. I believe this pig has 16 functional teats, and with only 7 tiny piglets, they were just not going to keep up, especially in those first few days. Now, eglactia can also be caused by too much food or feed that is too high in protein fed right before they farrow. And unfortunately, that is a mistake that we did make. I have always been under the impression that you should feed a pregnant or lactating animal pretty much as they want. And while we did keep her on the same feed and the same amount that she had at her previous home, we did start giving her some of our spent brewer's grain. And that is pretty much all protein and fiber. It can be up to 25% protein. So while she didn't eat very much of it, she ate maybe a quarter bucket, maybe 5 pounds a day is what we were offering her. It may have been enough to push her milk production into overdrive. So that's something that we will definitely avoid in the future. With her, at least, I'm not positive that that was a factor, because all of the other sows that have ever given birth here eat a far larger amount of that high protein brewer's grain, and we've never had a problem with any of them. But it is something that we are now aware of and will adjust our feeding program accordingly. As I was able to examine her more thoroughly, I became more and more confident that that was actually what was going on and not a full-blown case of mastitis. She never spiked a fever. Her milk flow was pretty normal. The milk itself never showed any indication of blood or coagulation that you would see with bacteria. And although her udders were very full and firm, they weren't really hard except for one. And she actually does still have one teat that I believe she did have a small infection in, but that is getting a little bit better every day as well. So I am glad that I gave her the antibiotics. It may have been enough to knock down any low-level infections and hopefully stop this incident from being way, way worse for her. So the good news is that Donna is doing fine at this point. She's eating and acting normal again, and we're very thankful for that. Now, through all of this, she was still doing a really good job of taking care of her piglets. She was going in there every few hours to feed them, and they always seemed warm and happy and full when I would check on them. And I was going out there probably every hour, if not more frequently. And unfortunately, between one of these checks, she managed to step on or crush another piglet. So that brought us down to 6. And while I was hoping for a dozen, I was still going to be very grateful to have 6 healthy Hereford piglets on this farm. But unfortunately, that was not to be. That night we went to bed knowing we had done everything we could for them, but that night I could barely sleep. I was worried that she was going to go further downhill and not be able to take care of these piglets. So at one point I went in with some warmed goat's milk and started teaching them to drink from a pan. Now, in most cases, when you take over the care of an infant animal like this, we would bottle feed them. But for some reason with piglets, that's usually a really bad idea. When you're trying to teach them to take the bottle, it's very common for them to aspirate on the milk, and they can develop pneumonia really easily. So it is highly recommended that you pan feed them or get them to just drink from a bowl instead of trying to bottle feed them. But while I was in there trying to feed them, she got mad at me. She came in and pushed me out of the way and fed them herself. So although I went to bed that night really worried about what was going to happen, I felt like at the very least she was going to take care of them. I got up in the middle of the night. All 6 of them were curled up in the heat lamp, sleeping good, seemed full. Everything seemed fine. Of course, she was laying in the wallow, but at this point I figured that that could only help reduce some of that swelling that she was experiencing, and that she was basically trying to treat her condition by doing that. But when I got up again at 5 a.m. and came straight out here, I only found 3 of those 6 remaining piglets under the heat lamp. And that's when my heart sank. I started looking all around digging through the bedding, seeing if they were anywhere in the pen or outside the fence, listening for any kind of calling. Nothing. And that's when I realized that the only place they could possibly be were under their mama in that horrible freezing cold wallow. And in fact, when she got up, that's where I found their poor little smothered bodies. And while I was in there, I woke up the other 3 that were under the heat lamp, and they immediately started trying to get over the board that was meant to keep them from doing the very thing that ended their lives. I really thought that barrier was tall enough to keep them in, but what I witnessed happening with the other 3 were that they would sort of bunch up against the back of it, and then because they were hungry, and hungry piglets will try to nurse on anything warm, they were scooting their noses up underneath the bellies of their litter mates, and they were actually accidentally tossing each other over that board. So apparently 3 were able to make it over, and the remaining 3 that luckily didn't retreated back to their heat lamp. And because of Donna's condition, I couldn't make that board any higher because she was already struggling to get over it. So at this point I felt completely defeated and knew I had to come up with a plan to save those last 3 piglets. And after a little bit of thought, I realized that I had 2 choices. I could take them up to the house and set them up in a stock tank under a heat lamp, feed them with my goat's milk out of a pan, and basically hand raise them. And the other option was to try and cross foster them with my American guinea hog sow, who had given birth less than 2 weeks before Donna had. And I know from colony raising these guinea hogs that these moms have no problem nursing piglets that aren't their own. In fact, it seemed like all the piglets would nurse on all the moms. It was pretty much an open milk bar out there. After some hard deliberation, I decided that that was my best bet, to incorporate them into this other litter. She only had 6, so she definitely had plenty of milk to go around, and she was a good, experienced mama, and I thought she could do the job. So I bundled up those last 3 piglets and I carried them out there. And as soon as she heard them make a squeal, she decided that she was their mama and she was gonna protect them. She instantly came over and rushed them into her hut, into the straw with the other piglets. Even the other pigs in this group that aren't mothers right now wanted to protect those piglets. So I thought they're in good hands. None of them were being rough with them, and they seemed to be a welcome addition to her litter. So of course I went back several times throughout the day. The first time I checked, they were sleeping all in a huddle with the other 6 piglets. It seemed like they had been fully accepted into that family. The second time I checked, they were sleeping by themselves, but they were nice and warm and comfortable. I could tell they had eaten. They even had milk on their lips. And I thought, thank God, we're gonna save these last 3 piglets. Everything's gonna be all right. It's not the litter I wanted. I was still very worried about Donna, but I was feeling so relieved that those babies were gonna be all right until I woke up the next morning. And of course, the first thing I did was rush out there, and I found their cold little dead bodies out there in that hut. And Mama Pig was nursing the rest of her pigs. There was plenty of milk available. I don't know what happened. I suspect they may have burrowed into that straw with the other piglets and gotten crushed by either Mama or one of the larger pigs, or even just the weight of the rest of that litter that was a little bit bigger than them. And that was probably the most depressed I've been in a really long time when I found those babies there. I couldn't believe we had lost the whole litter. After feeling like we were the most prepared we have ever been for a birth on this farm, for things to go so wrong. Such a very hard lesson to learn. Over the next few days, Donna slowly got better and started picking at some food and then getting a little more active. Yeah, you can see she is back to her old self. Her milk is completely dried up, so she has no more pain. And she even came back into heat. So we know that she's gonna be all right and that we are gonna be able to keep her as a breeder. And that's really the only upside to this whole story. But we are gonna have to make some changes. We're gonna look into ways to making her farrowing pen a little bit larger so that we can actually close her and the piglets up in there privately for the first few days so that we don't run the risk of them coming out, because obviously our guard board didn't do the job. We're also going to be very, very careful how we feed her in the future. She's not going to get any of the root grain or any other high protein feed. And we're also going to try and ensure that we breed at least 2 females at the same time, if not more, so that we have the option of cross fostering them, and that the piglets will be right around the same age, so that that's more likely to be successful. Now, I know they say hindsight's always 20/20. In this case, I really wish I had taken those piglets in and tried to pan feed them instead of fostering them. I thought everything was going great. I don't know what happened. I don't know that I would have been any more successful at keeping them alive that way. I do think that if I could have gotten them through a couple of days until Donna was feeling a little bit better, I maybe could have given them back to her. But all of that is just speculation at this point, because all we're really left with here is a sad story and some hard lessons learned. But that's farming. Those are the risks you take. Pregnancy, birth, it's a risky business. Really anything you're doing that involves nature and biology has a will of its own. And all we can do is keep learning and adapting and trying to find the best way to take care of our animals. So I'm sorry I don't have happier news to report. I promise you guys that I'm gonna make it up to you with tons of cute baby lamb and baby goat footage in the next few months. So I hope you stick with us. As always, thanks for watching. And if you're interested in the video where we first got Donna, you can check it out right here. Happy holidays, guys, and we'll see you next time.